Janet. My name is Tatiana, and I have the great honor of taking over as host for Janet. And before I do, I just want to take a moment for us all to show her some love and appreciation for making this event what it is, and just the amazing leadership and love and energy and patience she's put into this. So Janet, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so on behalf of Access to Integrative Medicine, AIM Health Institute, and the GW Office of Integrative Medicine and Health, welcome to A Mindfulness Experience. AIM is a nonprofit organization with the mission to provide vulnerable and low-income communities with access to whole person health and wellness. GW's Office of Integrative Medicine and Health promotes integrative medicine by providing learning opportunities to healthcare professionals and healthcare consumers. Today's facilitators, who I'm very, very excited to introduce, our integrative medicine nurse practitioner, Kimberly Cabe, and Mara Benner, Mind, Body, Spirit Director of the GW Center for Integrative Medicine and founder of Four Directions Wellness. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Kimberly.
Great, thank you, Tatiana. I think this is the first time I've ever officially seen your face. It's a beautiful face.
Good to meet you.
So today I want to talk about food-driven inflammation. And the reason that I want to talk about food-driven inflammation is because inflammation is, by definition, immune system function. It's driven by the immune system. It depends on the immune system, and it affects the way the immune system works in everything else that it does. So the immune system is divided into two sides. The innate side of the immune system is the inflammatory side. So it's always ready to respond, but it's very non-specific. It recognizes an invader and it just creates inflammation in order to kill cells. Viruses specifically, and we've been dealing with a viral pandemic, viruses infect human cells and hijack the system in order to replicate. So in order to kill the virus, the human cells have to be destroyed. So the inflammatory molecules of the innate side of our immune system kill the bad guy by directly killing human cells. And it does this through molecules called cytokines and in many other ways. But we hear a lot about cytokines, and cytokines literally means cyto, which is cell, and toxic, a toxin. The other side of the immune system is the adaptive side, and it takes about a week to kick in. So the adaptive side of the immune system is much more specific. It learns the shape, so to speak, of the virus more specifically, and it attacks that virus instead of depending on so much inflammation. And this is why when you catch a virus, you feel awful for the first week, right? When you catch the flu or COVID-19, you have headache, fatigue, malaise, fever, you don't want to get out of bed, you're miserable because you're inflamed from head to toe, you're inflamed. When the adaptive side takes over, those symptoms start to dissipate and you begin to feel better. There are surfaces in our bodies that interact with the outside to protect the inside. So of course we have skin, but inside of our bodies, we have surfaces that touch the outside. So what we breathe into our lungs is considered outside, and what we put into our gut is considered outside. So these surfaces create a barrier against pathogens. And just inside of that barrier lies our immune system. The majority of those cells are in the gut. The majority of our immune cells are in the gut, just behind the surface where we have so much outside coming through every day, and so much outside that has pathogens coming for a ride, and in the American diet that has chemicals and additives and toxins coming for a ride. So this barrier needs to be healthy in order to keep out pathogens. And also what we expose to that barrier needs to be high quality and not loaded with chemicals and toxins. When that barrier comes in contact with things that are harmful, it loses its ability to keep out bad guys, and it triggers innate immunity. It triggers immune inflammation on a chronic basis. And what we know about the people who get the sickest with COVID-19 are at the highest risk for catching it, and the flu and other viruses, have the highest risk for adverse outcomes, organ failure, sepsis, and death, is that they are already inflamed. So where does that inflammation come from, and how can we control it? If we are exposed to a virus that's going to trigger inflammation, it behooves us to not already be inflamed, because chronic levels of inflammation equal far more intense illnesses and a much higher risk that the immune response will get out of control. And that out of control response is where we see organ failure, sepsis, and death. The same people who are experiencing severe outcomes from COVID-19, the flu, other respiratory viruses like it, are people who also have hypertension, diabetes, obesity. Well, what do we know about hypertension, diabetes, and obesity? They're states of chronic inflammation. When someone's blood sugar is higher than normal on a chronic basis, it drives inflammation. And the process that drives high blood sugar from the beginning is inflammation. So inflammation is the thing that kills us, really, no matter how you look at it, whether it's an acute illness or a chronic illness. So finding ways to mitigate inflammation and dampen innate immunity on a daily basis makes us healthy in the short term and in the long term. Not only can you experience better outcomes when you catch a virus, when you get sick with any kind of infection, really, but also you can prevent obesity, hypertension, diabetes, heart failure, which is heavily driven by inflammation. Alzheimer's, heavily driven by inflammation. So managing inflammation is the most important thing that we can do on a daily basis to get healthy and remain healthy. So the part that we can control about our immune system is what we expose to it, primarily through diet. What you breathe in is not always under your control, but what you eat is almost always under your control. So when we look at the diet and what drives inflammation and what doesn't drive inflammation, the standard American diet is driving inflammation all the time. There's almost nothing about it that's beneficial or helpful to dampen inflammation and keep the body healthy in general. So a Western diet or a standard American diet is typically associated with high levels of saturated fat, high levels of trans fats, which are very bad fats, high levels of sugar, and low levels of antioxidants and low levels of fiber. So that barrier in the gut that helps keep out bad guys and keeps the immune system from being overwhelmed is fed and repaired through fiber, through vitamins, through minerals, through antioxidants. So when we eat ultra-processed food, we're lacking all of those things, but we are gaining a lot of sugar, a lot of sodium, which also drives inflammation to a certain degree, and a lot of additives, chemicals, toxins that we know drive inflammation. In my studies, it's been shown that a high saturated and trans fat diet increases pro-inflammatory immune chemicals in the bloodstream, but it also causes infiltration of lung tissue by the immune cells that produce that inflammation. So if we're eating a standard American diet and we're exposed to a respiratory virus and our lung tissue is already overwhelmed with immune cells that produce inflammation, we can almost guarantee that our response is going to be severe, and we're probably going to end up with pneumonia. My study also showed that high saturated and trans fat diets reduce the capacity for our B cells, which is the antibody producing cell on the adaptive side of our immune system, to function, which means that when we're fighting a virus, the inflammation never goes away. We don't get to a week and get the relief that the adaptive side of the immune system would offer for us because the B cells don't function normally. So prolonged inflammation and a higher risk for organ failure, sepsis, and death. In humans, we know that chronic consumption of saturated fats, trans fats, and sugar have been shown to activate the innate immune system chronically, with chronic production of cytokines in the bloodstream at all times. And consumption of saturated fats and trans fats also contribute to insulin resistance, which is our first step towards diabetes. And what did I say about blood sugar? The higher the blood sugar, the higher the inflammation. So as the inflammation climbs, the blood sugar climbs, and the inflammation self-perpetuates. fiber in the diet feeds our microbes. The microbes that live in our gut help us digest our food. They produce some of the nutrients that we need. They produce substances that help to dampen inflammation, and they also directly interact with our immune system. The microbes in our gut actually help to train our immune system from infancy. When we don't eat fiber, there's a big shift in the kind of microbes that we have, in the health of the microbes, and in the way that they function with our immune system. So if we're eating ultra-processed toxic food and we're not feeding our microbes fiber, we can be guaranteed a balance in the gut that makes things worse, that contributes to more immune system activity and more inflammation. So the lack of fiber in the American diet, along with all the sugar and saturated fat that we consume, directly drives inflammation. We also have mitochondria in every cell of our body. And mitochondria, you might remember from school, the powerhouse of the cell, right? It makes ATP, and ATP drives all the cellular processes, burning sugar, detoxifying the cell, etc. Mitochondria are also directly involved in the immune response. So when a virus enters a human cell, the mitochondria react by demanding more and more inflammation and creating what's called oxidative stress inside the cell. So this actually contributes to cell death. And when mitochondria are not working well, we don't work well. If you can't run every cell in your body and you can't detox every cell in your body, then you're not going to function well. I mean, if you didn't put oil or gas in your car, you wouldn't expect your car to function well either. Well, if our bodies are already inflamed before the virus shows up, this mitochondrial response is more severe. And one of the things that drives mitochondrial dysfunction, among many, is insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is the first stage to diabetes. When we've been eating this standard American diet that drives up inflammation and drives up our blood sugar, when sugar can't get inside of a cell to help mitochondria do its business, then they're already struggling. And when a virus enters, they're really unable to manage the functions from an immune perspective that they need to be managing. And they most definitely can't continue to run the cell. So it's almost guaranteed that those cells are going to die. And when they die, they release toxic substances that kill all the cells that reside nearby. So they kill healthy cells as well. So I want to talk about just a few of the chemicals that we have in the American diet. There are so very many that it would take years to cover them all. But the foods that are the most popular in the United States, especially that are fed to children, are almost always ultra-processed industrial foods. So they're lacking all the nutrients that feed us and fuel us, but they're also loaded with things that hurt us. One thing you may not have considered is sodium content in industrial foods. Very high sodium consumption triggers a pro-inflammatory state. It reduces our adaptive immune system, and it pushes pro-inflammatory states because we can't ever turn off the inflammation. So if you're consuming high amounts of sodium and you catch a virus, you go into inflammatory state and then you can't get out of it because the adaptive side of the immune system is not functioning properly. Some of the chemicals in our food are also strongly associated with metabolic syndrome, which is just obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, the inflammatory diseases, right? Artificial sweeteners, aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, these all contribute to insulin resistance and thus more and more inflammation. Many of the preservatives, some of the emulsifiers, all associated with chronic inflammation, some of them through insulin resistance and some of them through direct damage to the gut, particularly with some of the emulsifiers and with some of the artificial sweeteners. there was a rat study that I read about once with artificial sweeteners, where they fed one group of rats their typical diet, and they fed another group of rats their typical diet with the addition of 2 of the artificial sweeteners. And what they found was that the rats eating artificial sweeteners became diabetic. And the weirdest thing that they did in the study was they did fecal transplants to the healthy rats, and healthy rats began to develop diabetes as well. So the cause of the diabetes in the rats eating the artificial sweeteners was changes to their microbial balance, changes to good bacteria versus bad bacteria, and it led to inflammation and diabetes. And when they put that microbial balance into a healthy rat, it made the healthy rat sick as well. So the question then is, how do we eat to prevent chronic inflammation, chronic immune stimulation? So I read a study the other day, and I forget who sent it to me, but in Israel, they did a study on kefir, which is fermented milk, similar to yogurt, but it's drinkable. And they found that administering kefir after someone had contracted COVID-19 dramatically reduced their cytokine levels, improved their symptoms, and led to them getting better faster. So we know that consuming probiotic foods balance the innate side of the immune system and the adaptive side of the immune system. They reduce inflammation, they reduce the need for tons and tons of cytokines, tons of inflammation, and they allow the adaptive immune system to work better and kick in faster. So yogurt, kefir, and this can be coconut milk-based or, happy milk, I'll say. Lacto-fermented vegetables, which are incredibly easy to make at home, but it's this lactic acid producing bacteria that has this effect. So all of these things, consuming probiotics like this in food helps to balance our immune system and reduce inflammation. Consumption of amino acids from protein. The amino acids help to feed our gut and help the gut repair itself, and also help the body just run better in general. And many of these amino acids are directly necessary for mitochondria to function and for detox to occur. The caveat to protein is it needs to be happy protein, right? So if that's plant-based protein, if you consume animal-based protein, they have to be happy animals. So not confined feeding lot animals that have lived on a diet of antibiotics and chemicals and not had sunlight or grass, but happy animals. Minerals, we have to have minerals. Minerals come from well-grown fruits and veggies. And by well-grown, I mean that fruits and vegetables that are grown in commercial farms, they're very mineral depleted. The place that minerals come from is the soil that plants are grown in. So if they're grown in bad soil, they won't have good mineral content. So organic farms that rotate their crops regularly, that keep from depleting the soil, that don't just pour tons of fertilizer on the soil in order to get their plants to grow. And of course, we want plants that aren't loaded with toxins, right? We don't want measurable amounts of Roundup in our fruits and vegetables. And then consumption of polyunsaturated fats from vegetables, from fish, from nuts, and from fruits, not from canola oil or soybean oil, but from whole, real food. All of these things improve immune system balance and reduce inflammation in the short term and in the long term, which makes us healthier people. It prevents chronic illness. And so we would want to, of course, avoid a diet very high in saturated fats, particularly the trans fats. In general, a healthy diet is mostly fruits and veggies with a sprinkling of nuts, fish, plant-based oils, and if so desired, happy animal protein. I like to tell my patients to fill up 3/4 of their plate with produce and then put these other things on the side. The more produce we consume, the more minerals, the more antioxidants, which are vital to reducing inflammation, and the less likely we are to fill up on things that aren't helpful for us. The plant-based oils that are beneficial would be those that come from olive oil, avocado oil, unprocessed red palm oil. These oils have not been ultra processed, and this ultra processing leads to trans fats and very high levels of inflammation. So the processed oils would be canola oil, vegetable oil. Has anyone here ever squeezed a vegetable and gotten oil out of it? What exactly is vegetable oil? Where did that come from? Well, it comes from soybean, actually, which is real hard to get oil out of. And when they get oil out of it, they use high levels of benzene, and it becomes basically chemical stew. Not helpful at all. We would also want to avoid margarine, corn oil, cottonseed oil, all for the same reason. All of these processes turn these oils into basically just inflammatory drivers, inflammation drivers. Well, I had a paragraph left, but I already said it because that's just how I work. Any questions?
Kimberly, it looks like there are a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
One person was wondering, Diana, if there is a test to see how much inflammation you have.
Yes, there are several kinds of tests that you can do for that. Not really helpful to necessarily do blood tests to look at immune cells, to look at levels of immune cells, because we don't really have anything to compare that to say who's healthy, who's inflamed, who's not. Those numbers are really for acutely ill people that we're looking at for sepsis and organ failure. But we can look at things like levels of ferritin. When levels of ferritin, which is the iron storage molecule in your body, are high, it means that your mitochondria are struggling, that your cells are dying, and they're dumping their ferritin out into your bloodstream. So that means inflammation. And the higher the ferritin, the more the inflammation. We can look at other markers of inflammation like C-reactive protein, the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which shows us sort of a side view of inflammatory processes. Dr. Kogan, what else would you recommend?
So, I think the CRP and SED rate are okay starting tests.
Not CRP, CRP-HS. CRP is worthless.
No, right. But, generally speaking, I tend to like assessing oxidative stress because it's a lot more sensitive test of ongoing inflammatory response. But you really have to get a sense of what the source of inflammation is, because each, let's say, the inflammatory response to biotoxin is very different as to response to sort of a more of a cardiac type of inflammatory versus a severe inflammation. As somebody like lupus, it doesn't matter what test you get, everything's going to be through the roof. Very elevated. If it's a more autoimmune condition, you really need to get antibodies, not necessarily the inflammatory markers. Or you have to get a very obscure marker, something like IL-1 or IL-6, which are not routinely tested. So it's not I agree with you. It's not a really easy. Yeah, it's not straightforward. You really have to, there's no such a blank test, just let's do tests.
It's very specific to the patient. And really, we're looking for signs that inflammation is present, not proof that inflammation is present. Because we all have inflammation, and if we can identify what the sources are, we can see patients getting better as we eliminate those sources.
Right, and all these blood tests we're mentioning, CRP and SED rate, and even the ferritin, so those are all what's called an acute phase reactants. So they simply react to an inflammatory trigger. But if they're normal, it doesn't mean there's no inflammation. So it's a lot more complicated conversation. So unfortunately, I don't think we can easily answer that. So we do have a couple of prepped questions from before. So I do want to make sure we get to those as well. But there's tons of other questions. So how about I'll do the prep question from the emails first. And then we'll go back and we'll do one.
And then I can answer these others. Okay.
So there was a question about travel. We have one of our participants who's traveling to the Texas, I believe, and wondering to her older parent and wondering if okay, and do you need to be quarantined? So let me show you the current CDC guideline. In fact, if you are vaccinated, CDC basically says that for the in-country domestic travel of any kind, you do not need to be quarantining yourself after the travel. This is from CDC website, updated as on April 2nd, so you can read their statement at the front page of this specific. So it's a coronavirus CDC website. So you can read that if you're fully vaccinated, you really can safely travel. If you do not need to get tested before or after travel, and you do not need to self-quarantine. And I'm reading this as if it says, regardless of the state regulations. That's how I'm reading this. So if you read that state requires it, I would say this message outweighs whatever state decides to do, and I wouldn't bother self-quarantining at all. And the second question was, is it better to travel by air or by a car? Well, that's a really tough one. I mean, Texas is not in our backyard, so driving to Texas is a little challenging. So I would say use your judgment. I mean, probably driving is safer from COVID perspective because you're exposed less, definitely. But it's also a long drive, so there's some issues with that too. But I do think that if the question specifically relates to whether or not it's safer, I would say yes, car. So I think that's, and if that, I don't know who, I forgot who's asked that. I think Kathy. And Kathy, if you wanna, if there was anything else to that specific question, you can unmute yourself if you hear. And I'm sorry about this. Here. Okay, does that answers your question?
It answers my question. Yeah, it's helpful. I mean, you know, it's hard to know. I had not seen this particular version of the guidelines. I had looked at an earlier version, I guess, and that's where I got the quarantine issue. So this
seems to be most up to date. That's what I found. So I think you're good to go. Enjoy.
Okay. No, I appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, driving to Texas is a bit of a
back to Kimberly. There's tons of other questions.
Disadvantages. Thank you.
Sure.
So Benita asked, what if you eat higher levels of sodium due to POTS or other forms of dysautonomia? The first thing I'll say about POTS is that it is frequently driven by abnormally high inflammation. So I would be worrying about inflammation that might already be present and not being addressed. But the second thing I would say is that if you're consuming your sodium from mineral-rich, unprocessed salt, you're dampening a lot of that inflammatory response. And it would be hard to eat that much salt when you're adding it to your own food versus the amount of sodium that comes, sodium, not salt, sodium that comes from industrial food, from ultra-processed food. Does that help? Dana asks, curcumin to help reduce inflammation. I meant turmeric.
Kimberly, I just want to make a quick interruption. In restaurant food, people have no idea they put a tremendous amount of sodium in restaurant food.
Yes, I agree with that. They really do. I use a variety of spices to reduce inflammation, but I always go back to the root cause. When you can identify where the inflammation is coming from, you don't have to chase it with so many supplements. And that's always my preference and approach. And I think that's the case for many of us. But I certainly love curcumin. It does help with inflammation a good deal. It's not specific to the immune system, but it's definitely beneficial to the gut and some other processes. And then Mark asks about the endocrine test for leaky gut. No, I've never used that. Mark, do you want to say something about that? Maybe he fell back asleep.
Sorry, no, I'm here. It's looking at the amount of dysbiosis and looking at the amount of putrefaction of tryptophan in the gut. I just wasn't, we use it a little bit here in New Zealand. I just wasn't sure whether it had any popularity in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of tests somewhat different in US. There's some gross tests when you have to swallow a couple of different sugars, and then you look if one of them that's not supposed to leak into the blood does. I would say most of these tests are really not very accurate. They have degree of certain error. Sometimes they're useful. I think there was for a while idea that zonulin in the blood is a very accurate test.
Dr. Kogan, I think we lost you.
Oh, okay, so he's out. And then there's a question about vegetarian diets and meat substitutes, dairy substitutes that have become popular. You know, there are a couple of meat substitutes that are not awful. And I bet Dr. Frame can help me with the names. I don't eat meat substitutes, but I had a patient ask about them and I looked them up, and there was one or two that wasn't full of garbage, chemicals and sodium. Maybe Beyond Meat, Dr. Frame, it's yeah. Beyond Meat?
Beyond Meat's pretty good, as is Impossible. They're both trying to not have a bunch of weird ingredients in them. That being said, it's obviously a little bit difficult to do that. So I think that they have their place, and there's been some research that showed in the short term you could have improved panels for your cardiovascular disease. So your markers of cardiovascular disease can improve by using these products as opposed to having, say, a regular red meat burger. And mindfully, that's probably not an organic grass-fed burger either. But I don't know if in the long term if they're going to have any negative health benefits. And I would be willing to bet there may be some downsides to them.
Right. That anytime we try to recreate something from an industrial perspective, it never turns out well. That's just been my perspective. I don't know, black bean burgers and mushroom burgers. It's just much easier for me to approach it from a produce perspective. But I did think Beyond Meat was fairly good. And how you can tell is the ingredients list, reading the ingredients list. And if there's anything in there that's not whole food or a relatively safe preservative, then I would stay away from it.
I would also add that a lot of people who are very much red meat eaters do like Beyond Burger or Impossible Burger. So in that sense, they have some benefit. Like, for instance, my husband will eat them and he's never going to be a vegetarian. So if we're not talking about someone who might go with a plant-based or somewhat plant-based on that spectrum, they may be beneficial in that instance.
Yeah. Okay, that was all the questions.
Okay, I think that we can hand it over to Mara for the mind-body practice.
Great. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Tatiana, and to Dr. Frame and to Kogan. And it's just wonderful to see you all. So I wanted to express, or at least maybe place some words on some things that I'm finding with my clients, and it may resonate for you as well. And would like to do a meditation around this. You know, over a year ago, as you all know, pretty much overnight, we went into a stay-at-home order, and globally and collectively, we're working with COVID. And that was an adjustment when we went through that period of time. And through this past year, we have potentially experienced losses of loved ones, of changes in jobs, of just loss of connection. So we've experienced loss. And likewise, you may also have found this time to be inspirational in the fact that you had some personal growth, that you found time at home to be very beneficial due to eating healthier, maybe just having some time to actually meditate. but found probably some aspects of this that may have also been of benefit to you. And now, as we all potentially are looking to figuratively or actually literally get a shot in the arm, which is kind of a boost of our spirit, and are headed into the spring, which often means renewal, I'm finding that people are starting to consider entering into this new normal that we're yet to figure out what it is, but are also having mixed feelings, and feelings of that recognition of loss again, and maybe all different types of feelings that you haven't maybe placed words or really haven't had time to think about. And so, what I'd encourage us to do is through this meditation that I'm about to take you through, is to just spend a few moments coming in for yourself and maybe thinking through the aspects of the past year and how you would like to move forward. And so I'm very hopeful that this meditation in particular will be of benefit for you and will resonate. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. A couple of things, if you've been with me from other meditations, I encourage you, first of all, to please make sure that you're safe and secure. So please make sure you're in a chair that as you begin to relax, you can really feel yourself and feel comfortable relaxing. Also take a quick moment just to sense or notice if you need to put socks on or if there's anything that will just help you become even more comfortable. Good. So we're going to start by first just coming in and taking a deep cleansing breath in. And we know that it's always our breath that helps anchor us in the present moment. Let's go ahead and breathe in and out, starting a natural rhythmic breath and bringing your awareness to that. And as you do, I want you to imagine first, almost as if you yourself are a candle. And you have a wick that is at the top of your head and that goes down through the middle of your spine. And what we're going to do is when you're ready, go ahead and light that wick. And as you breathe in and out, you might sense or notice how that light and the flame of that light has some flexibility, just moving with any of the wind. Sense or notice that. And next, you might begin to sense or notice how, as that lighted candle begins to melt the wax, you might begin to feel or sense it at the top of your head, beginning to just simply relax, letting go. That melted wax goes down through the back of your head, letting go, releasing your muscles. You might feel or sense the melting wax going down the left and right side as well. Releasing, relaxing. And feel or sense that melting wax that becomes heavier. Allow it to start to go down your forehead. And you'll notice or sense that it releases the muscles there. Into your eyes. Just letting go. The cheeks, the jaw. Again, just sensing or noticing how the muscles relax and you become heavier. into your throat and neck. Allowing that melting wax to go into your shoulders. And as you do, you might even notice that your shoulders let go. Then down your back, releasing, relaxing, letting go. And then feeling it around your right arm, your right hand and fingertips as they become heavier. And allow this melting wax to go into your left arm, your left hand. Good. And coming back up to your shoulders, allow the melting wax to slowly go down around your lungs. Feel your chest release down into your lower stomach and abdomen. Into your right leg and foot. And then your left leg and foot. And as you do this, you'll sense or notice possibly how your body feels heavier, more relaxed. Entering in to the great void and area of nothingness. Nothingness. So using your imagination, I want you to find yourself in an enclosed wooden cabin. The room is dark, but there's just enough light for you to be able to see. And you feel safe and secure within this cabin. So take a moment just to see if you can sense, feel, see the surroundings. Sense if there's any furniture. Sense if there's anything trying to get your attention. And next you might notice an altar in the corner of the cabin. There are unlit candles, many unlit candles. When you're ready, go ahead over to the altar. You might wish to pick up the box of matches there. When you're ready, think back over the year. Think about the losses that you may have encountered, whatever those may have been. Might have loss of connections to others. You might have had the loss of loved ones. What else? When you're ready, go ahead and light a match. And then go ahead and choose and light one of the unlit candles. you'll notice how it begins to illuminate the cabin. When you're ready, go ahead and light yet another candle for whatever else you might wish to recognize. And simply continue the process of lighting the candles, as many as you wish, with the recognition of each one, there becomes illumination. And when it feels complete for you, go ahead and just sit back to view the lighted candles. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." So when you're ready, go ahead and take a deep cleansing breath in, slowly releasing. And now you can look around this cabin and see how it has become more illuminated. So now bring to mind aspects of COVID that had been helpful and beneficial to you. What were they? Maybe slowing down, eating healthy, working from home. What were they for you? When ready, go ahead and just bring one of the most valuable ones to your mind. Notice and sense how that feels in your body. Maybe you feel energetically lighter. As you bring this to your awareness, notice how the roof of the cabin begins to open to a beautiful spring day. Feel or sense the sun and the warmth of the sun on your head. Feel it on your body. Begin to see the light, that feeling of renewal. Next, identify again something else that was beneficial to you. As you bring this to your awareness, you might sense or notice that the cabin walls begin to fade away. And you are now outside and one with nature. Feel and sense all that is around you. You have awakened from the deep sleep. Notice how everything you need is within you. Feel and sense the energy of renewal of all that is in nature. As we start to enter in to this new energy, remember the lessons learned. And maybe more importantly, hang on to that which you have found to be of value. So sitting in this beautiful area of spring, renewed energy, take a moment to ask yourself, what is it that you wish to create? Or how do you wish to be in this new normal? And then fully embrace that as we start to step into our new reality. And so with another deep cleansing breath in, slowly and gently releasing, letting go. Begin to come back in by wiggling your fingers, wiggling your toes. Gently and slowly beginning to open your eyes. And welcome back. Just wanted to check in and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts. Also, just want to also mention, if this meditation brought up anything additional to you, you can always reach me through the GW Center for Integrative Medicine. You know, please don't just hang on to that. It's helpful to work through something that might come up. So feel free to reach out, and we're always happy to help and assist you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. That was so wonderful.